Hi, a student asked a great question that I wanted to become a discussion point for the class. What is the difference between Le Corbusier's machine for living, his architecture at the Villa Savoy, versus the Bauhaus? This is a really important question because on first glance and maybe second and third glance, they seem so similar. They're both sort of stripped down, using concrete, using plain and clear geometric shapes. So how are we to understand them as something different? The Bauhaus was deeply involved with what was called the machine aesthetic. So was Le Corbusier. In fact, this is a pervasive idea at the time because machines are literally permeating life more and more in the 1920s. You get someone like the photographer Paul Strand, who actually writes an essay saying, well, the machine is the new god of the new society. And the machine aesthetic is about sort of the way parts function together in a non-decorative way. And certainly Le Corbusier is referencing the aeroplane, the automobile, and the ocean liner as the inspiration and the models of a machine age design. It helps to think about how for Le Corbusier, those kinds of machines represented a kind of purity of form. And to remember that his architectural vision was based on his earlier ideas of purism. Purism wanted to take the messiness of cubism and clean it up, tidy it up, but most of all, make it rational, make it make sense, and also give it a quality of the pure forms that had always been part of high art. So there is an idea in Western culture that goes back to Plato of formal purity. Plato, who had the idea that there are ideal forms behind the veil of appearances. So Raphael's School of Athens painting from the High Renaissance is a kind of statement of this tradition in Western culture. Here's Plato represented at the center of this space, which is incredibly orderly and clear, with pure forms of basic curving spheres and squares, elemental, simple geometry in clear patterns. So Le Corbusier is invoking that. Although he's dealing with the machine age of the 20th century, he's also thinking about the pure forms and the transcendent beauty of architecture. And this design with these, our slender struts, they're called pilatos, are actually really like columns in a Greek temple. And one of the things Le Corbusier does is he gives you aesthetic features that are meant to be a kind of awe-inspiring beauty, such as the curtain windows. The Bauhaus is not interested in so much in a dramatic approach and a new kind of beauty and wonder and surprise. It is producing potentially what can be considered a new kind of beauty, but that's a side effect, an offshoot. That's not the direct purpose. The direct purpose is a new kind of thinking, a new kind of seeing, a new approach to making things for a new society. So here, the Bauhaus architecture is also very clear and simple, but there are no special tricks with slender columns and cantilevered walls. There are no special tricks with curtain windows. In fact, it's the opposite. The idea is to use kind of the basic materials that allow you to create the space that will function well. So there's this moment in the Bauhaus video where we see this idea of this woman working, doing the work, the kind of labor that is traditionally women's labor in the kitchen. And the idea of, is the kitchen designed so it's going to be efficient for her? She doesn't waste her time and energy fumbling and stumbling around. That's different from the ideas and the purposes for Le Corbusier. He wants you to see the spiral. He wants you to see the way space is unfolding. He's not thinking about whoever has to dust all of this white to keep it looking bright. So the Bauhaus video talks about, in 1925, the move to Dessau and Gropius building a new Bauhaus building. And we learn that it uses steel, glass, concrete, and it gets done in under 1 year, designed so that everything's under one roof, and there's workshops for all the different forms of study. So in other words, unlike Le Corbusier, who's thinking about shapes and space, who's thinking about ideas of pure form, they're thinking pragmatically. This is a very pragmatic approach, and the simplicity of the building, its modern materials, reflects that pragmatism. Le Corbusier doesn't really have that pragmatism. You can't build the Villa Savoy for lots of people. A building like that is an architectural, special, custom building for a very select client, a very elite, wealthy client. So in thinking about this modernist architecture, you have a whole spectrum of people internationally, hence the international style, thinking about a new form of architecture with a new relationship to materials and the kind of engineered lines. But there are different ways of approaching this, and it has different meanings. Certainly, it has a different meaning for Le Corbusier, creating this kind of very special and unique world that is the Villa Savoy, versus what's happening at the Bauhaus. So, for instance, they talk about the building in the film as a perfect example of constructivism. So it's more closely aligned with the ideas that had been coming out of the Russians, and there was close interchange between Russian and German artists at this time. The idea of building a new world that is related to the new dreamed of, hoped for growth of power and freedom for the masses, the working class, the great numbers of common people. So if you go back to the Bauhaus film around, where's the time point? 939, is that correct? The narrator starts talking about how the students and the faculty, the head of the architecture, collaborated on a project to design a worker's estate. So this is a British narrator, as you've noticed. And so I just want to define for you in British English, an estate means a public housing project. So a public housing project for workers was one of the projects that the Bauhaus undertook. And he goes on to explain that this is this housing is addressing a housing shortage, and it's a kind of simple design with prefabricated parts in order to be, again, pragmatic, to make good housing that works and is inexpensive. That's really different than the project at the Villa Savoy.